We are commencing legal action against Mrs. Meghan Markle. Her televised allegations, particularly the Oprah interview, have inflicted undue harm upon the royal family. An apology no longer suffices. The matter will now proceed through
The message reached King Charles behind closed doors, marked urgent, and carrying a plea Meghan believed could stop a royal catastrophe. But the king had already seen the documents that changed everything. He read her request once, placed it beside the explosive Sussex file, and delivered a response so cold and final that even his closest advisors fell silent. Meghan had asked for intervention. Charles dismissed her plea without granting her the private audience she desperately wanted. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles remained alone, staring at the sealed folder delivered through guarded royal channels. The Sussex file, a compiled record of private communications, strategic plans, financial discussions, and disputed claims involving royal access, was not a harmless misunderstanding. Those pages suggested family relationships had been discussed beyond palace control, and that crown authority had been presented in ways the monarch had never approved. He turned the first page, then stopped when Harry's name appeared beside a passage about trust between father and son. The king's expression tightened, but he did not reach for the telephone. Calling Harry would have turned an institutional review into another family argument, and he knew that distinction could no longer be ignored. Meghan's written plea demanded intervention, warning that exposure could damage her children, fracture her marriage, and destroy what remained of her connection to the royal family. That institution, the sovereign, senior working royals, and the household serving the crown, carried obligations larger than any private bond. Her words were emotional and carefully chosen. Yet the documents beside them were colder. A private secretary entered expecting instructions for negotiation. Charles removed his glasses, closed the folder, and said there would be no special protection, no suspended review, and no private audience. The aide hesitated, stunned by the finality in his voice. But the monarch repeated the order. To use a voice that resonates with you, to response and harangue made. Charles signed the letter without changing a word. Meghan had asked him to act as a father. He had answered as king. And as that rejection began its journey across the Atlantic, one question became impossible to silence. Why had she been so desperate to reach him before anyone else examined the file? To understand why that refusal struck with such force, the people trapped inside this crisis, and everything each of them stood to lose, must first be brought into the light. Behind the formal letters and sealed documents were four people bound by blood, marriage, resentment, and wounds that had never fully healed. Charles faced the possibility that his own son had crossed a line the crown could not ignore. Harry faced another rejection from the father he still wanted to reach. Meghan confronted a threat to the life she had built. William watched quietly, knowing every decision could reshape both his family and his future reign. Charles felt the conflict in its most painful form. As sovereign, he had sworn to protect the crown, the institution built around the monarch and the working royal household. As a father, he still carried the memory of Harry before anger, distance, and public accusations hardened everything between them. Protecting his son now could weaken the authority he had spent years trying to steady. Refusing protection could destroy what remained of their personal bond. The king understood that either choice would cost him something he could never fully recover. Meghan faced a different fear. Her public confidence had always been part of her strength, but the documents threatened more than appearances. They touched her private correspondence, professional relationships, financial discussions, and her understanding of agreements made with the palace. If those records showed royal access had been described more broadly than Charles approved, her credibility could suffer at the exact moment she needed control most. She knew the danger was not simply embarrassment, it could reshape the life she had built beyond Britain. Harry received confirmation of the dismissal while standing in the kitchen of his California home. He read the message once, then again, gripping the edge of the counter as the words settled. Meghan watched him carefully. He finally looked up, and asked whether she had told him everything contained in the file. She answered with anger, insisting that private exchanges had been removed from their proper context. Yet fear broke through when he asked who had authorized the strongest claims. She spoke around the question, and he noticed. William chose his words with equal care during a separate briefing. The prince did not demand punishment, nor did he ask Charles to close the door on Harry forever. He simply warned that private sympathy could not be allowed to erase evidence placed before the sovereign. The future king understood why the decision mattered. Every exception made for family could weaken the rules expected of everyone else. Camilla saw the answer before Charles spoke it aloud. The queen consort watched him fold Meghan's letter, place it inside a drawer, and turn the key. His silence was not uncertainty. He had separated the plea from the evidence, and she knew the decision was now emotional only in its cost. That point of no return did not begin with the leaked file itself. It began months earlier, during a private exchange that convinced the palace the Sussex conflict had become something far more dangerous. The crisis began long before the sealed folder reached the king. Its true origin lay in a carefully controlled royal ceremony, where one private conversation shattered the palace's remaining confidence in the Sussexes. Nothing appeared unusual to the public. The smiles held, the music continued, and the official program remained unchanged. But inside a restricted reception room, a confrontation involving Harry, William, and a disputed request created the record that would later return with devastating force. Harry had spent years negotiating over titles, security, family access, commercial freedom, and the right to reference his royal connection in private ventures. Each discussion carried enormous weight, because those privileges could give future projects credibility, while any misuse could make the crown appear to endorse arrangements it had never approved. Charles had tolerated vague language and informal promises longer than his advisors wanted, because he still hoped his younger son might return to him. That patience weakened when private understandings began appearing inside proposals circulated beyond palace walls. The decisive moment came after a Commonwealth Remembrance ceremony at St. James's Palace. The ceremony, a formal royal event honoring the nations connected through the Commonwealth, had ended peacefully when Harry asked William to speak privately in a restricted reception room. He wanted his brother's support for an arrangement allowing the Sussexes limited ceremonial status without returning to full royal duties. The request sounded like compromise, but it demanded the benefits of public position without accepting the daily responsibility attached to it. William listened before refusing. The prince explained that privilege could not be separated from service, and that the monarchy could not create one rule for Harry simply because the family feared another public conflict. His brother accused him of closing every path home and turning distance into permanent exile. The future king did not raise his voice. He answered that geography had never been the true barrier, trust was. Weeks later, Charles received a documented account showing that the brothers' private exchange had appeared almost word for word inside a confidential Sussex planning paper circulated to outside partners. The planning paper, a private document setting out proposed goals and future arrangements, contained details known only to Harry, William, and two senior officials. The king read the copied phrases twice, then authorized a deeper review. The investigation uncovered more. Correspondence suggested possible royal access, future ceremonial involvement, and unresolved family negotiations had been presented with greater certainty than Buckingham Palace had ever approved. Charles could no longer dismiss the issue as careless wording. Someone had turned private hope into apparent royal commitment. Meghan learned through a recorded call with a Sussex advisor that the review had expanded beyond the leaked conversation. Her anger vanished into silence as she realized the palace was reconstructing an entire chain of decisions. With the origin of the breach exposed, private letters could no longer contain the conflict, and the family was pulled toward the face-to-face confrontation everyone had spent years trying to avoid. Meghan's rejected plea was not her first attempt to stop the crisis. Before the king issued his final dismissal, One tightly guarded video conversation brought them face to face without press officers, public statements, or carefully rehearsed smiles. Charles entered determined to listen, but unwilling to bargain. Meghan entered convinced she could expose the weakness in the palace's case. Within minutes, the discussion became something deeper than documents. It became a reckoning over loyalty, family, and truth. Charles had agreed to one preliminary conversation before considering her formal request. He believed she deserved the chance to explain how private royal material had entered communications linked to the Sussex operation. No communications team could interrupt or reshape their words. Only one legal advisor sat nearby on each side, present to clarify legal risk, but forbidden to answer for either participant. That restriction mattered, because every hesitation, denial, and admission now belonged to them alone. Meghan spoke first. She told the king that the palace had repeatedly left her exposed, forcing her to defend herself while denying her the institutional protection given to working royals. Institutional protection meant the legal, media, and administrative support provided by the royal household during official service. She argued that the disputed documents reflected survival, not betrayal. Charles listened without interruption, then answered that pain did not grant anyone permission to use confidential family discussions outside the circle in which they were shared. The tension sharpened. Meghan accused him of treating documents as more valuable than people, then asked whether he was truly prepared to lose Harry forever. Charles stopped writing. He placed his pen on the desk and allowed the silence to stretch, before admitting that he might already have lost his son by pretending boundaries did not matter. His voice remained controlled, but the sadness beneath it changed the conversation. She had expected anger. She had not expected grief sharpened into resolve. Charles then lifted a page containing language attributed to a private conversation with Harry. The passage described possible royal access as though agreement had already been reached. Meghan froze before insisting she had not personally written those words. The distinction immediately opened a deeper wound. If she had not written them, who had? And if she had seen them, why had she allowed them to circulate? Meghan refused to identify the person who approved the wording. She said the discussion could not continue while every answer was being treated as evidence against her. Charles pressed once more, but she closed her notebook and ended the call without giving him the explanation he needed. The silence that followed left the king facing a brutal choice: contain the matter as a family dispute, or remove personal protection and let the palace process move forward. Once the conversation ended, emotion gave way to authority, and the true balance of power shifted toward the advisors capable of turning Charles's private disappointment into an irreversible royal decision. Kings do not make decisions in isolation, even when the pain is deeply personal. Behind Charles stood constitutional advisors, private secretaries, legal counsel, and the heir who would inherit the consequences. Each voice carried a different warning. Mercy could appear weak. Punishment could look vindictive. Silence could allow the disputed claims to spread further. Yet beneath the legal arguments sat a grieving father, staring at his son's name and realizing that every available choice demanded a sacrifice. Charles alone could decide whether Meghan received personal access to the sovereign, but he could not control every part of the machinery now moving around him. The Palace Review, a formal examination of records connected to the royal household, placed preservation of the documents in legal hands, while communications advisors prepared for the public consequences. That division mattered, because a private meeting could no longer erase what had already entered an official process. Family negotiation and institutional evidence had become two separate battles. William spoke without issuing demands. The prince understood that his influence came from representing the monarchy's future, not from overruling his father. He warned that a private exception for the Sussexes could become a precedent, meaning a decision others might later use to demand the same treatment. If confidential claims could be withdrawn through emotional pressure, every royal boundary would become negotiable. The future king did not ask for humiliation, he asked for consistency. Charles raised one hand and requested 10 minutes alone. He crossed the room slowly, opened a cabinet holding family photographs, and paused beside an older image of Harry. For one painful moment, the monarch disappeared beneath the father. He remembered the child who once trusted him without hesitation, and wondered when protection had become indistinguishable from permission. Then the king closed the cabinet and called his advisors back. Camilla entered after the briefing resumed, and waited until the room cleared again. The queen consort told him compassion did not require surrender. She knew his refusal would be judged as cold, but she also knew continued exceptions had only delayed the reckoning. Charles admitted that rejecting Meghan's plea might close the final door through which Harry could have returned. His wife answered that a door held open by fear was not reconciliation. The legal counsel then identified the most damaging passage. One section anticipated future royal concessions before Charles had approved or even formally discussed them. The wording transformed hope into apparent authority, making the crown seem committed to arrangements it had never accepted. Charles read the dismissal once. No meeting would occur. No investigation would pause. No private assurance would override the documentary record. He signed without changing a line. The king's pen had ended the argument in London, yet the first true consequences would erupt thousands of miles away, inside a home where fear and loyalty were beginning to collide. The dismissal arrived without warmth, negotiation, or an invitation to respond. Meghan read the first paragraph standing upright, but by the final line she had lowered herself into a chair. Harry remained across the room, watching her face change before asking for the letter. She hesitated. That hesitation carried more weight than the king's formal language. For the first time since the documents surfaced, Harry appeared less focused on defending his wife than on discovering what had been kept from him. Meghan finally passed the letter across the table. It confirmed that Charles had rejected her plea, denied the requested private audience, and allowed the palace document review to continue without royal interference. The review, a formal examination of records, communications, and disputed claims connected to the royal household, could now proceed without family pressure stopping it. That mattered because every new finding threatened her credibility, while every unanswered question pushed Harry farther from the father he had already lost once in anger. Sussex advisors began working immediately. They assessed reputational damage, possible legal exposure, and whether a public statement could defend the couple without drawing even greater attention to the file. Meghan listened as strategies were offered, then placed the king's letter flat on the table. Disbelief hardened into controlled fury. She said Charles had never intended to hear her. Harry looked up and answered that his father had heard her clearly. He had simply remained unconvinced. Harry then asked the question she had avoided. Had outside partners ever been given the impression that royal privileges or future ceremonial roles were already secured? Meghan called the discussions exploratory, meaning they concerned possibilities rather than approved commitments. He pressed harder. If nothing had been promised, why had the wording sounded final? She told him confidence had been necessary to keep negotiations alive, but he heard something else beneath the answer. Fear had been turned into certainty. A communications advisor refused to endorse a proposed statement, declaring every document fabricated. During a recorded conference call, the advisor said that language could not be defended against records already known to be genuine. He resigned from handling the response moments later. Meghan called the departure disloyal. Harry said nothing, because the resignation confirmed that their united defense was beginning to crack from within. Harry then opened a disputed memorandum and found the circulation date. It had been sent to outside contacts before he had reviewed its final language. His anger shifted away from the palace and toward himself. His name had carried promises he had never personally approved, yet his silence and public loyalty had allowed others to assume that he had. The remaining advisors waited for direction, but Harry no longer wanted another prepared answer. He had to choose between standing beside Meghan before the world or confronting her without protection. That decision arrives after midnight, when Harry closes the door on the remaining advisors and asks Meghan for the one thing the palace could not force from either of them: the complete truth. There were no cameras, legal teams, or palace officials in the room when the turning point finally came. Harry sat opposite Meghan, with the disputed pages between them, no longer speaking as a prince defending his wife, or as a son resisting his father. He spoke as a husband who needed clarity. Meghan, exhausted by days of pressure, understood that another polished answer would not save them. The crisis had stripped away every institutional shield, leaving only two people and the truth between them. Harry had spent years treating every attack on Meghan as an extension of the hostility they had faced during royal life. Defending her had become central to his marriage and to the person he believed himself to be. She carried an equally powerful fear. Any concession to the palace, the household serving the sovereign and managing official royal duties, felt like proof that the institution had been right to judge her. Admitting fault no longer seemed like correction. To her, it felt dangerously close to surrender. Harry touched the disputed pages and asked whether the language had been deliberately strengthened to attract support from potential partners. Meghan held his gaze before admitting that expectations had been presented with more certainty than Charles had authorized. The discussions were supposed to preserve possibility, she explained, not create a false promise. He asked why possibility had been written as though approval already existed. This time, she did not hide behind context. Meghan admitted that fear had shaped the decision. She believed the Sussexes would lose relevance, protection, and bargaining power if outside partners saw them as completely separated from the monarchy. Their remaining royal connection had offered influence, but it had also become the measure by which others judged their future value. Harry lowered his head. He had once believed leaving Britain would free them from that pressure. Now he saw that survival and escalation had become almost impossible to separate. The deepest revelation came through Meghan's private account of why she had sent the desperate plea. She believed Charles might protect Harry, even if the king refused to protect her. The request had been aimed at the father beneath the crown, hoping love for his son would stop the review. His dismissal proved that calculation had failed. He had chosen a boundary over another rescue. Harry remained silent before making his own decision. He would not attack his father publicly. He told Meghan they had to acknowledge the disputed wording, cooperate with the review, and stop treating every royal limit as an act of revenge. She resisted at first, then understood that he was not abandoning her. He was trying to prevent their marriage from being consumed by another war. Their choice altered everything. By refusing another public battle, Harry allowed silence to say what no statement could. As dawn reaches London, that silence leaves the palace's decision uncontested, allowing one newspaper front page and one gathering outside the royal gates to define the moment for millions. By sunrise, the crisis no longer belonged to the king, Meghan, or Harry. It belonged to broadcasters, newspaper editors, palace crowds, and millions of people choosing which version of the family they believed. The silence from California intensified every headline. Buckingham Palace offered only a controlled confirmation. Then one front page appeared across London with an image of Charles beside a sealed folder, and 4 words that transformed a private dismissal into a national verdict. The king said no. Charles became the center of every morning broadcast. British presenters described his refusal as a defining test of royal authority, arguing that the monarch had chosen evidence over emotional pressure. Buckingham Palace, the official London headquarters of the sovereign, declined to release the complete contents of the Sussex file. Officials confirmed only that Meghan's requested intervention had been rejected, and that the formal review would remain separate from any future family reconciliation. That distinction mattered, because one concerned the integrity of the crown, while the other concerned a father's wounded relationship with his son. A royal correspondent stood outside the palace and delivered the sharpest judgment of the morning. During a live broadcast, she called it the day Charles chose the crown over the possibility of immediate peace with Harry. The words spread quickly because they captured the cost behind the decision. The king had strengthened his authority, but that strength had come through another painful separation from his younger son. Harry watched the coverage without speaking. Meghan entered as one commentator questioned whether the Sussexes could retain public trust after acknowledging disputed language. He reached for the remote and switched off the television. He did not attack the broadcaster or defend the documents. She sat near him, equally exhausted, and understood that his silence was not calm. It was the sound of a man who had run out of enemies to blame without first examining himself. Outside Buckingham Palace, supporters and critics gathered near the gates beneath copies of the newspaper headline. Some praised Charles for refusing pressure. Others called the decision cruel. One woman stepped forward and placed a handwritten card beside the railings. Its message cut through the noise. A family needed honesty before it needed victory. The sentence was repeated on television within the hour, becoming the human verdict beneath the public spectacle. No aggressive Sussex rebuttal followed. Instead, a restrained written statement acknowledged that language in certain planning materials had not reflected confirmed palace agreements. It also promised internal corrections. Meghan approved the statement reluctantly, while Harry refused to add any accusation against his father. That admission removed the final uncertainty. Charles's refusal stood, the disputed language was acknowledged, and the battle had reached its end. With the documents acknowledged and the king's refusal left standing, only the emotional cost remains to be measured, and that cost will define the final meaning of the entire crisis. In the end, there was no dramatic reconciliation and no last-minute reversal. King Charles did not grant Meghan the meeting she demanded. The palace did not suspend its review, and the Sussexes did not continue denying every disputed detail. The crisis ended not with victory, but with clarity. Charles preserved the boundary surrounding the crown. Meghan confronted the consequences of desperation. Harry finally refused to turn another family wound into a public war. Each survived the moment, but none escaped unchanged. The formal review reached a controlled conclusion. Private royal conversations had been presented beyond what Buckingham Palace approved, but the damage was contained through written acknowledgements, corrected language, and a stricter separation between Sussex ventures and royal authority. That authority meant the power to speak or act in the name of the sovereign. The distinction mattered because personal family ties could no longer be used to suggest official approval, while future contact could not become another path for reopening settled boundaries. Charles maintained his refusal to meet Meghan over the documents. He would not allow urgency, anger, or emotional pressure to replace the evidence already examined. The king read the final summary alone and found no satisfaction in being proven right. When Harry's name appeared near the conclusion, he rested his hand over it for several seconds. The monarch had protected the institution, but the father felt the cost. He closed the folder slowly, knowing authority had survived, while trust had not. Meghan accepted that her desperate plea had failed, because Charles no longer viewed urgency as proof of innocence. She understood that influence gained through royal proximity could not survive without confidence from the family behind it. Her refusal to explain everything immediately had deepened suspicion, while the documents had shown how fear could push possibility into certainty. She had fought to preserve control, yet desperation had taken it from her. Harry chose restraint. He issued no memoir threat, granted no explosive interview, and made no public accusation against his father. That silence became the first real sign that he understood reconciliation required responsibility rather than pressure. William supported the settlement without demanding humiliation or permanent exile. The prince recognized that firmness carried greater authority when it was not driven by vengeance, and his measured response left the monarchy stronger rather than crueler. Charles's dismissal delivered the final verdict. The crown would no longer sacrifice institutional truth merely to postpone family pain. The king accepted grief as the price of protection. Meghan lost the power to force royal engagement through crisis. Harry lost another part of the relationship he once believed could always be repaired later. Yet by ending the cycle of accusation and retaliation, all three finally faced reality. The explosive documents exposed more than disputed promises. They revealed that a crown can survive broken trust only by drawing a final boundary, and that a family begins healing only when everyone stops pretending the boundary does not exist. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.